Hey, this is Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver at caregiverdave.com, coming to you on the number one rated caregiver podcast on the internet, along with my lovely co-host, best-selling author, and former mayor of Grover Beach, California, Debbie Peterson. Hey, Deb.
Hi, Dave.
Just a reminder to like and subscribe to this show to help other caregivers who are struggling. It just takes you a second, and it means so much to them. And we do have an especially exciting show planned for you today. Certified leadership consultant Steve Williams started his own consulting company in 2013 after spending over 35 years in manufacturing leadership positions, working with companies around the world. Steve taught at the master's level for a dozen years, is a public speaker, master storyteller that combines his unique perspective and experience with humor to educate and entertain his audience, two things that you should always do to an audience. An accomplished author, Steve's latest book is Notorious: Leadership Lessons from History's Most Notorious Leaders. We were just talking about notorious leaders before you came on the air. She said, is that a good thing? I says, well, I say caregivers need to be selfish in order to survive. So if it's okay to be selfish, it's certainly okay to be notorious. So you have my permission to be notorious. So Steve, so great to have you on the Caregiver Dave show. And let's get right into the questions that caregivers have on their minds. So you talk about Catherine the Great. That's a strange place to start, but she has some principles that minimize stress and helped her focus. Tell us about the great Catherine.
Absolutely. When I first met you and Debbie, I think I told Debbie that caregiving is the hardest leadership role, and it's the one that nobody trains you for, right? So you've got to kind of learn on the job. And Catherine the Great, she had a couple of techniques that I think can apply and help people minimize stress. One of the things was her principle that don't worry about things you can't control. So what Catherine did is she refused to waste any energy on stuff and endless what ifs and things outside her control. Instead, she laser focused on maximizing what she could influence and positioned herself to react to uncontrollable situations as they occurred. Mm-hmm. There's a really interesting statistic if you think about all the things that all of us have to worry about. Caregivers have an extra group of things to worry about. But, a recent poll showed that out of everything we worry about, 40% never happens, wow. 30% already happened, 22 is needless, and only 8% actually happens. And out of that 8%, we only control about 4% of that. So, be happy, don't worry, I guess, is the bottom line.
I'm glad that you gave me that statistic, because I've been quoting something similar to that for ages, saying over my lifetime, 50, 60 years of adulthood, everything I've ever worried about, 90% of it never happened. So pretty dang close, man.
Pretty darn close. Absolutely.
And so that's so
true. She focused on that 4%, right? The key is, how do I identify what's really under my control and things that I can impact and just focus and dominate that 4%.
In business, I always heard about the 80-20 rule, 80% of everything versus 20%. And this is a 96-4, not 80-20.
Well, I use the 80-20% rule all the time.
20% of the people do 80% of the work.
Right. Exactly. That's
and
perfect correlation.
Versa.
Right. It's another statistic that's a little different, but there is a tie in there, Debbie.
Yeah, I just love it that it's 96.4 because that really is a laser focus.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's all about getting the biggest bang for your buck, right? And people that are caring for others, they're exhausted, they're fatigued, they only have so much bandwidth, and why waste any energy at all on things that you really aren't going to change?
What did Napoleon do when he was facing challenges? How did
Napoleon, it was interesting. That's a great question. And it's something that every great leader should do. And in the caretaker arena, I think that it helps reduce anxiety, the same things that his approach was. So his approach was, To quote him, he would ask himself several times a day, what if the enemy were to come on my left or my right or in my front? What that comes down to is reducing anxiety by planning. So planning for all the possible contingencies, like what could go wrong today? Like if I were to go to see a patient today, what could all of the various things that could possibly happen, and then how would I handle that, right? How could I pivot? Right? He reduced anxiety through obsessive scenario playing. He'd work through the night planning and planning counter moves and counter moves for every possible action that the enemy might take to something he's doing. I think that we need to do the same thing, right? We can reduce anxiety by I have already running that through our mind and knowing, or at least guessing at, what we think could possibly happen during the course of a day or a week or with a particular patient in this case, right? And then how would I handle that? And what if they do this? Well, what do I do then? Having that already worked out in some kind of a framework really does reduce anxiety, whether it's in a business situation or in this case.
Well, there's another one you raised, and it's somebody I don't know. Sun Tzu, am I saying that right? And boundaries?
Yes.
So who is Sun Tzu, and what did that individual have to tell us?
He's the very first character in the book, and the oldest. It was 2,500 years ago, roughly, and most people know him as the author of a book called The Art of War.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got it on my shelf. I read it a number of times, not just about leadership, but about life in general. A bunch of, basing things on spiritual and military and business theories and combining them all into a set of rules to make you successful. So what we can learn from him in this condition is, how to set boundaries without guilt, right? If anybody that's taken any kind of a trip on an airplane and they go through their safety talk and everybody half listens to it, one of the first things they say is put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else. Well, where he comes in is answering the question, why is putting your own mask on first not selfish? Well, he understood the same thing that these flight attendants are teaching. You can't help somebody if you're unavailable to help them yourself. So save yourself first, make sure you're in a position to do something, and then help somebody else. Because a depleted leader, right, in the airplane scenario, if you pass out, anybody around you, you're not going to be able to help at all. Same thing goes for a caretaker. If you're not taking care of your mental and your physical, state of being, you're not going to be much use to them.
Yeah, boundaries are so important. A lot of people can't even imagine someone that you're taking care of crossing boundaries that you're uncomfortable with. First of all, if they're crossing boundaries, it's your fault because you never laid out what the boundaries are, the rules of the game. But if you substitute a parent that you're caring for, especially if that parent has dementia or they don't even have to have dementia. Most parents just push your buttons because they still treat you like kids. And that's why you moved out of the house. A lot of ethnic parents are very good at dispensing guilt. I tell those people, you got to have boundaries, and then you have to enforce the boundaries. And those boundaries will be tested, and you've got to do it. And it's uncomfortable. You're going to seem like the bad guy. You're going to feel guilty about it. But as a good leader, right, just like you're not being selfish when you put your oxygen mask on first. You're being wise. So when you're setting boundaries, you're helping yourself not be motivated by resentment, right?
You're exactly right. And to your and Debbie's point, going back to Sun Tzu, his first option was to be smarter than his opponent, not more violent. And how that translates into this is burning yourself out isn't smart. It's self-destructive, right? You've got to protect your energy, your time, and your mental health. It's not selfish. It's strategic preparation of your most valuable asset, which is you. Asking for help is a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah. It reminds me of the political climate we're in now. The conservatives, are into common sense and logic and this and that, and the liberals are into compassion and empathy. And we need both. I mean, without one or the other, you're both kind of on the extreme. You become a tyrant or you become a bleeding heart, give away the store, right? There has to be a
Right.
balance.
Yeah, you've got to have a balance. Exactly right. And that goes for every aspect of our lives.
So
Well,
what about Al Capone? You've got something good to say about Al Capone?
yeah, he didn't pay his taxes.
Well, that was his downfall. Exactly. That was his downfall.
They couldn't
Exactly.
get him on murder, but they did get him on taxes.
And they're still doing it that way, which is the saddest thing of all.
Yeah, yeah. He built his empire based on, starting out in the streets and working his way up. If you watch any, The Godfather or any show about organized crime, or, Sonny Barger and the motorcycle 1%
Yeah.
outlaw
He was doing what
motorcycle
the
groups, right?
politicians should have been doing, helping
Exactly.
people in need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They came up through the ranks and they learned what it takes and they've done the work. And what Al Capone teaches us is, you've got to first off, the lessons from him were, understand what your customers really want, right? And in this case, I guess it's understanding what your patients really need, and then doing kind of a gap analysis, and am I providing that, or is there something I need to adjust in what I'm giving? They're my customer, whether they're a patient or a customer or a client or your kids, right? They've got certain needs, and am I meeting those needs? And am I willing to do the work? And being the boss, or being the caregiver, you've got to be willing to, literally get your hands dirty in some cases, right? But do the work and not rely too much, on somebody else, because you've got to prove I'm not above any of that. I would never ask somebody else to do something that I haven't either done myself or I'm not going to do right alongside of them. So I think his aspect is, you've got to been there, you've got to have done the work, you have to understand what it takes for whatever the endeavor is, whether it's running a business, whether it's running a mob affiliation, or whether it's being a caretaker. You have to understand what it really takes to do the job, and then assess, am I really providing that customer, whether it's a client or a patient, with what they need? And if not, can I give them what they need? And do I need to pivot, or do I need to, again, ask for some help?
Yeah. Help me with my history lesson. I must have been out during the time they were telling me about Attila the Hun. What bad decisions did he make?
Oh boy, Attila. What really kicked off the book for me, I had picked up a book on a business trip about 20 years ago, and it was called Leadership Lessons or Secrets from Attila the Hun. And I read it on the plane and kind of put it away for 20 years. This is my sixth book. And all of a sudden, I was looking for an idea for a new book, and I thought, it's still on my bookshelf. I pulled it off and thought, wow, if I can learn something I can apply today from one guy, there's got to be other people out there. So Attila the Hun, what he learns is you've got to build a good team. And whether it's a business team, whether it's a caregiving team, whether it's in this case, family members, you've got to surround yourself with people that are not only going to help you, but also tell you when they disagree with you, right? And he was all into building bench strength, right? Building a team. He commanded the greatest army in the history of the world, but he would demand of all of his generals that they become mentors, right? That they teach and bring up the next group of people that are going to take over. Obviously, this was war conditions, so they would lose a lot of people in battles. They had to have the next group of people, the next man up, the next woman up, to take over. And he demanded that every single person that reported to him become a mentor and start showing others how to do what they're doing in a case of them not being available anymore, or surges in need in some cases. So it was all about surrounding yourself with capable people but also people that would push back and say, hey, you know what, you're making a bad decision. Here's what I think. And being able to listen to that feedback.
So what imperfect decisions did he make? I'm just curious.
I mean, all the leaders, nobody's perfect, right? I mean, one of the lessons is great leaders know that they don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But one of the keys is, during a battle, he had a battle plan, and he would set the troops out on his particular battle plan. And as circumstances were unfolding in front of him, he would realize that, hey, you know what, this isn't working. I got to come up with a plan B. And he would be able to immediately reassess the situation, maybe redeploy his troops to maybe go around and attack from the flank or go behind the opponent and attack. And he would be able to adjust and communicate those changes
Nice.
in real time, which is a critical aspect of anything. So, there's not really one specific instance that I can point to, but every one of the leaders made a lot of mistakes, but their ability to quickly assess it and pivot was what really made them successful.
I got it. And caregivers hate to ask for help. They don't want to be obligated. They don't want to feel like they're weak. Talk about that.
Sure. I mean, it's people think that asking for help is a weakness, and it's not. Clint Eastwood said a man's got to know his limitations. I think that leaders have to do the same thing. They've got to understand what they can do, what they can't do, and when they've kind of reached the end of their rope on a day-to-day basis and say, hey, I need some help. I need somebody to come in and do some things for me or teach me how to service this patient better. Going back to Sun Tzu, he knew that as good as he was, he couldn't do it alone. He needed input from other people. He needed help from his generals. He was brilliant, but he wasn't perfect. Nobody was perfect. So he was not afraid to ask for help. None of these leaders were afraid to ask for help. Insecure leaders, on the other hand, giving a business, correlation, insecure leaders, they're afraid to surround themselves with people that are a threat to them, right? I've always wanted to hire people smarter than me to work for me, where insecure leaders take the exact opposite approach, where I don't need help, right? And they're threatened that this person could be after my job. Well,
Yeah.
I would want every person working for me to want my job, because if they take my job, the best way for them to do that is to make me successful, and I'm going to move up the chain. So I want the smartest people around me. I want people to tell me when I'm making a bad decision, when I'm just doing something that makes absolutely no sense at all. So, surrounding yourself with good people and asking for help when you need it. It's interesting that, the correlation between leaders and caregivers, right? They don't want to ask for help. They think they can do it alone. And that's what really separates the poor ones from the so-so ones from the great ones. The great ones know they can't do it all by themselves.
That's for sure. Debbie?
So what about, I like to be professional. I like to do things right. I like them to come across well. I like to communicate well. And I've had to really work with myself to allow to say it's okay not to be perfect. But how can caregivers, in what ways can they give themselves permission not to be perfect?
That's a great question. One of the things that I took a look at after reviewing a number of your shows is good decisions result from experience, and experience results from bad decisions. So it's all about learning from your bad decisions. And the truth is, we're not supposed to be perfect in impossible situations. And in many cases, being a caregiver is in an impossible situation, right? You're never going to make all the right decisions. You're always going to be missing something, or something you could have done better. But you've got to survive. Self-forgiveness isn't weakness. It's all about making the necessary decisions. And if they were wrong, just acknowledge that, hey, I made a bad decision. What do I do to correct it and move forward? So it's all about, you're going to be especially caregivers, right? They're going to be having incomplete medical knowledge. They're going to have unpredictable human behavior from their patients. They have unknown future circumstances, limited resources, and they become very fatigued, right? I mean, it takes quite the constitution to be a caregiver day in and day out, whether it's somebody that you're working for through a agency or whether you're caring for a family member. It can be extremely fatiguing, and you've got to understand that it's okay to forgive yourself for being tired. It's okay to be, forgive yourself for, not being as prompt as you should, bringing them a medication or something to eat, or like I said, I've never been a caregiver, but I've had 16 surgeries, so I've been on the other end of it, and I feel for my wife, and I've watched all the things she's gone through taking care of me and having to constantly be on call. And, in some cases, I couldn't get out of bed for a couple of months because of some spinal surgery. So she really had to drop everything, and she was just wiped out at the end of every day. And you've got to be okay with that. And there's got to be a point where you say, you know what, I've hit that point. I either need some help or this got to wait till tomorrow, and be able to be okay with that internally.
Can I throw in one more?
Sure,
I really,
absolutely.
I'm always fascinated by Machiavelli.
Ah.
Have you looked at what he might have to teach us?
I haven't. I've had people suggest, a couple of people, if I were to add some characters to another edition, and he's one of them. Obviously Machiavelli is known for, whatever is needed as a means to an end, right? So whatever it takes, whether it's good, bad, moral, immoral, it's the result that's most important. I guess I would take away, if I'm kind of making, some assumptions on the fly, that, what we could learn from his scenario is look at the results that I need to make or that I need to gain, right? And what can I do? I would take the opposite, where he might do something that we would consider immoral to get the result he wanted. I would take that out of the equation and use, okay, how can I ethically do everything within my power to make sure that I get the outcome that's needed in this case, whether it's, making a patient better or helping them with their rehab or taking care of their medication or whatever the case may be. So I think that's something that's worth looking into. The other one was, they suggested finding out how, Leonard kept the trains running on time. So there's a couple of people that have suggested some additional notorious characters if there is a next version of it. So I will certainly consider that one.
Well, let's talk about your book. Give us the title again.
Sure. It's Notorious: Leadership Lessons from History's Most Notorious Leaders.
So what do you hope people will get out of this book? And how many notorious leaders did you include in it?
Oh, there's 10. And I spanned the range of 2,500 years, starting with Sun Tzu and ending with Steve Jobs. And often I get the first question is, why is Jobs in this book? And given the title, and then anybody that really knows Jobs, I didn't know Jobs personally. I knew Steve Wozniak. I didn't know Steve Jobs, but there was definitely a good Steve and a bad Steve, and he was ruthless with his employees. So he was not a people person. Wozniak was. I came up with 10 characters over that span of 2,500 years. I was looking for people that had stories I could tell that we could take a positive leadership lesson from that would still apply to today. I had to find 10 of them that had a different lesson. I also wanted a mixture of men and women. And for every lesson in the book, I include a personal story from my journey where I applied that lesson and either spectacularly failed or I succeeded. And my intent with the book was, I'm hoping people learn from both the leaders and my successes and failures, because being in leadership my entire career, I wish I had a book like this when I started, because I made so many mistakes. If I could give people a shortcut where they can learn from my failures and capitalize on my mistakes, that would be the best outcome for me if I would hear that from a reader.
I'm sorry to ask this question, and I'm trying not to be political, but is Trump a good leader?
Wow. Interesting. I recently did a spin on the recent government shutdown, and I related it to the book, talking about characters in the book and the fact that government shutdowns are not really a failure of government. They're calculated and they're planned and they're as old as history. Genghis Khan and Catherine the Great, she created crisis to help with her, advance her career. Is Trump a good leader? I think he is. I think history is going to see him as one of the better leaders if we look at our history of presidents. And, the recent comparison between him and the prior administration, he's very polarizing, of course, right? You love him or you hate him. But if you just take out the emotion and you look at what's been accomplished in the first year versus what was accomplished in the last 4 years, I think there's a dramatic difference. And I think anybody that would look at this unbiasedly would say, he's rebuilt his empire multiple times. Yeah, he went bankrupt and made a lot of mistakes, but he learned from them and he came back, right? That's a hallmark of a good leader.
Yeah.
I think the same thing with he learned from his first term. He made a tremendous amount of mistakes in his first term, and he didn't surround himself with capable people. I think he's corrected that this second time. So if you look at a lot of the things that have been accomplished, I would make a case that absolutely he's a great leader. We've got 3 more years. Ask me in 3 years. I'm hoping I'd have the same opinion, but it all depends on if you're able to take emotion out. Right? Yeah. And look at policies, look at results, look at the economy, look at the stock market, look at how much business is coming back to the U.S. Yeah. So in terms, as a business guy, I look at results, I look at numbers, and I actually published an article after his first term. Is Trump good for the economy, or is Trump good for America? And I laid out all the facts from his first term, and the conclusion was yes. He was still very polarizing, but if you just separate the facts, I think I've always believed that we need somebody out of the business world, real world, being the president. I would have voted for Lee Iacocca. I think Ross Perot was one of my guys, and anybody that comes out of the business world that knows how things work and is not a career politician, I think would be a much better leader than any of the politicians we have today.
So a leader needs to be a good negotiator as well, right? Caregivers
absolutely,
and leaders
absolutely
need to be negotiators.
Yes, yes.
Right. Well, listen, we thank you for all of that. We have run out of time. I can't believe how fast our time has gone today. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Steve, how can our listeners reach you?
Sure. My website is stevewilliamsauthor.com, and the book is any place you can buy books, but if you buy it off that website, you get a free autographed copy. And for your readers and your listeners and your audience, if they order the book on the website and they mention your show, I'll give them a 10% discount.
Great. Debbie, how do we get a hold of you?
MayorDebbie.com, or go to Amazon and look for Debbie Peterson Integrity 101 series, and you'll find how I applied business to being in local government and what I found out because I was able to do that.
And I'm at caregiverdave.com and also on Facebook, Caregiver Dave, 34,000 followers. So again, a big thank you to all my listeners out there all over the world for tuning in every Wednesday, making us the #1 caregiver podcast on the internet. Again, hit that subscribe and like button to help us out here. So until next week, same time, same channel. May God richly bless you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.